The island haven. My sister, Clara, always had a knack for finding beauty in the overlooked. When she bought the little island house off the coast of Lake Serenity, a shimmering expanse in northern Michigan, she saw it as her sanctuary. The island, barely half a mile wide, sat like a forgotten emerald in the water, reachable only by a narrow wooden bridge that swayed slightly with every step. It wasn't much, just a single-lane relic from decades past, held together by weathered planks and rusted bolts, but it was her lifeline to the mainland. Clara loved the solitude, the way the wind whispered through the pines, and the fact that she could escape the chaos of the world. I'd visit her there sometimes, hauling groceries across that creaky bridge, laughing as she'd tease me for being too city-bound to appreciate the quiet. The trouble started when the Lake Serenity Homeowners Association, HOA, got involved. The HOA governed the mainland properties around the lake, a mix of vacation homes and year-round residences owned by folks who liked rules almost as much as they liked their pristine lawns. Clara's Island wasn't technically under their jurisdiction, her deed predated their charter, but the bridge connected to a small strip of mainland they claimed as theirs. For years, they'd grumbled about the bridge's unsightly condition, its lack of permits, and how it didn't meet their precious aesthetic standards. Clara ignored them. She'd send polite letters back, citing her grandfathered rights, and go on tending her wildflower garden. But the HOA wasn't the type to let things slide. Led by Marjorie Henshaw, a retired real estate agent with a perm as tight as her grip on power, they'd been eyeing Clara's Island for years. Rumor had it they wanted to turn it into a community asset, a fancy way of saying they'd slap a dock on it, charge dues, and let their golf cart brigade picnic there. Clara's refusal to play ball only fueled their spite. The night the bridge fell. It was late October when it happened. I'd just spoken to Clara on the phone. She'd been giddy about a rare bird she'd spotted, some kind of heron she couldn't stop photographing. "You should come see it, Jen," she'd said. "Bring your binoculars." I promised I would, maybe the next weekend. But that night, a storm rolled in, nothing unusual for Michigan, just howling winds and sheets of rain. I figured Clara would be cozy in her little house, wood stove crackling, oblivious to the weather. The call came at 3 a.m. Clara's voice was frantic, cutting through the static. "Jen, the bridge, it's gone. Just gone." I bolted upright, heart pounding. "What do you mean, gone?" She explained how she'd heard a crash, like thunder but sharper, and when she'd run outside with a flashlight, the beam caught nothing but empty air where the bridge used to be. The pilings on her side were splintered, the mainland end a tangle of wood floating in the shallows. She was stranded. I threw on clothes and drove the 2 hours to Lake Serenity, arriving as dawn broke over the lake. The scene was surreal. The bridge, our rickety old friend, was a wreck. Boards bobbed in the water, and the mainland stump looked like it had been hacked apart, not just battered by the storm. Clara waved from the island, a tiny figure in a yellow raincoat, and I shouted across the gap, promising to get help. But something felt off. The damage wasn't random, it looked deliberate. I called the sheriff first. Deputy Mike Rollins showed up, a lanky guy with a mustache that hadn't changed since the 80s. He scratched his head, peering at the wreckage. "Storm could have done it," he said, but his tone lacked conviction. "Old bridge like that, maybe it just gave out." I pointed at the clean cuts on the mainland pilings, the way the bolts were sheared off. "Does that look like wind to you?" He shrugged, promising to file a report, but I could tell he wasn't eager to dig deeper. The HOA had pull in this town, half the deputies golfed with Marjorie's husband. Next, I called a contractor friend, Dave, who owed me a favor. He brought a boat and ferried Clara back to the mainland. She was shaken but furious, her dark hair plastered to her face from the rain. "They did this, Jen," she said, voice trembling. "The HOA. I know it." She'd found a note tucked under her door that morning, unsigned, typed in block letters, "Sell or regret it." It was the kind of threat that sounded cartoonish until you realized someone had just cut off your only way home. The HOA's game. Clara and I marched to the HOA's office that afternoon, a prim little building decked out with fake shutters and a sign proclaiming Lake Serenity, a community of excellence. Marjorie Henshaw sat behind the desk, her smile as fake as the flowers on her blouse. "Oh, Clara, what a shame about your bridge," she cooed, not even pretending to be surprised. "We've been saying for years it was a hazard. Maybe now you'll consider our offer." The offer was a joke, $50,000 for the island, a fraction of its value, with a clause handing the HOA rights to manage it. Clara laughed in her face. "You think I'd sell my home because you bullied me? I'm not stranded yet, Marjorie." But Marjorie's eyes glinted with something smug. "We'll see," she said. I started asking around town. The hardware store clerk remembered selling a chainsaw to a guy in an HOA polo 2 days before the storm. A fisherman swore he'd seen lights near the bridge that night, though he couldn't ID anyone. Piece by piece, it pointed to the HOA, but we needed proof. Clara filed a complaint with the sheriff, who dragged his feet, and we hired a private investigator, a gruff ex-cop named Lou who smelled like cigarettes and skepticism. HOAs are petty, but this is next level, he said. Give me a week. Meanwhile, Clara stayed with me in town, restless and itching to get back to her island. We borrowed Dave's boat to ferry supplies, but it wasn't the same. The HOA started spreading rumors. Clara was a recluse, a troublemaker, someone who didn't fit Lake Serenity. They even petitioned the county to seize the island for environmental violations, claiming her compost pile was a hazard. It was absurd, but it showed how far they'd go. The FBI arrives. 5 days after the bridge collapsed, Lou called. "Got something," he said curtly. "Meet me at the marina." We found him hunched over a laptop, a grainy video playing on the screen. It was security footage from a bait shop camera half a mile down the shore, time-stamped the night of the storm. 2 figures in hoodies, barely visible through the rain, worked at the bridge's mainland end, sawing, prying, methodical. One wore a jacket with a faint HOA logo. "Not enough for a conviction," Lou said, "but enough to rattle them." We took it to the sheriff, who finally agreed to question Marjorie and her cronies. But before he could, something bizarre happened. I got a call from Clara at 7 a.m. "Jen, get over here, now." She was back at the island, having insisted on staying there overnight with Dave's boat tied up. I sped to the marina, rowed across, and found her standing on her porch, wide-eyed. 2 men in dark suits were knocking on her door, badges glinting in the morning sun. "FBI," one said, turning to me as I stumbled up the path. "We need to speak with Clara Ellis." My stomach dropped. The FBI. Over a bridge. The agents, Ramirez, a wiry guy with sharp eyes, and Carter, a broad-shouldered woman with a no-nonsense vibe, sat us down in Clara's cramped living room. "We're not here about the bridge," Ramirez said. "Not directly. We're investigating the Lake Serenity HOA for racketeering, extortion, and possible ties to a larger criminal network. Your situation flagged our radar." Clara blinked. "My bridge flagged the FBI." Carter nodded. "We've been watching them for months. Financial irregularities, threats against residents, suspicious land deals. When we saw your complaint cross our desk, it matched a pattern. Destroying property to force sales isn't new for them. They showed us files, wiretaps of Marjorie barking orders, bank records of shady transfers, even a photo of her meeting a known fixer in Detroit. The bridge wasn't just petty revenge, it was part of a scheme to strong-arm Clara into selling cheap so they could flip the island to a developer. Unraveling the web. The agents needed Clara's help. "You're a victim, but you're also a witness," Ramirez said. We think they'll try again, maybe escalate. If you're willing, we can set a trap. Clara didn't hesitate. They took my bridge. I want them gone. I wasn't thrilled. FBI sting sounded like something out of a movie, but Clara's resolve was ironclad. Over the next week, the agents wired her house with cameras and mics. Lou kept digging, feeding us tidbits. The HOA had hired a local thug, Eddie Voss, to trash the bridge, and Marjorie had bragged about it at a cocktail party. The plan was simple. Clara would call an HOA meeting, play dumb, and hint she was ready to sell. The agents would catch them admitting to the sabotage, or better, planning something worse. The meeting happened at the HOA office, a tense affair with Marjorie smirking across the table. Clara laid it on thick. I can't keep up with the island without the bridge. Maybe your offer's my only option. Marjorie pounced. Smart girl. We'll handle everything, permits, cleanup. Just sign, and it's done. Then, in a hushed aside to her treasurer, caught clear as day on the hidden mic, Eddie can finish her off if she balks. No loose ends this time. That was it, the smoking gun. The agent stormed in mid-sentence, badges out, cuffs clicking. Marjorie's face went white as they read her rights. Eddie was picked up an hour later, spilling everything, the chainsaw, the late-night job, the $5,000 wired from an HOA slush fund. The treasurer cracked too, handing over ledgers that tied the HOA to a Detroit syndicate laundering money through lakefront properties. The perfect ending. By mid-November, the dust settled. Marjorie and 6 others faced federal charges, racketeering, conspiracy, the works. The HOA dissolved, its assets seized, and the county dropped its nonsense claims against Clara. The FBI didn't stop there. They uncovered a dozen similar scams across the state, dismantling a network that had preyed on small towns for years. Clara got her bridge back, better than before. The feds, in a rare move, funded a new one, steel-framed, sturdy, with a plaque reading Ellis Crossing. Dave's crew built it in record time, and we threw a party on the island to christen it. Half the town showed up, toasting Clara's victory with cider and bonfire warmth. Even Deputy Rollins came, sheepish but apologetic, promising to keep an eye out next time. The best part. Clara's island stayed hers, wild and free. She turned down every developer who came sniffing, content with her herons and her solitude. I moved closer, bought a cabin on the mainland, just a walk from the bridge. We'd sit on her porch some evenings, watching the lake shimmer, laughing about how a rickety old bridge brought down an empire. One night, as the stars reflected on the water, Clara nudged me. Think the FBI'll ever show up again? I grinned. Only if Marjorie breaks out of prison. We clinked our mugs, the island ours, the nightmare over. It wasn't just a win, it was perfect.